For most sports, rain is a disaster. In tennis, they stop playing and only come back when the rain stops. In football, the muddy ground means that it's harder to move the ball, and so it's not as exciting to watch. But in Formula One, many fans pray for rain. So why do F1 fans love wet weather races? And who was the best wet weather driver? Stay tuned to find out. The rain. You would think that rain and motor racing don't go together, wouldn't you? If you've ever driven in the pouring rain, then you know just how dangerous it can be. Plus, you have to slow down a ton. That's why Formula One wants to find a solution to the wet weather. After the Belgium Grand Prix last year, it was clear that the wet weather could be a little too disruptive. After just a few laps, the race was aborted because of low visibility. The rain had been pouring down all weekend and had already led to an upset. George Russell in his Williams had missed out on pole by less than 0.2 of a second, but he didn't mind. It was by far his highest qualifying result with Williams and a historic moment for a team that has struggled in the last decade. To make things even better, he didn't have to lift a finger to convert that qualifying spot into a position. The cars followed the safety car around the track for a formation lap, but soon after the start was aborted. They tried again 3 hours later, but eventually decided to just cancel the race, with the result determined by that first lap. And even though only half points were awarded, George Russell was in second place. It's probably not the way he imagined his first podium with Williams, but thanks to the rain, he had done the impossible. F1 fans, on the other hand, were not happy. Too much spray. Fans of the Belgian Grand Prix had waited around for hours just to be told that the race wasn't going ahead. That's why technical director Ross Brawn was hopeful that this year's cars would produce less spray. It's not actually the slippery nature of the track that's the problem, it's the water that's shot out the back of the cars. The full wet tire compound disperses 65 liters of water per second. That doesn't mean much to the driver at the front of the pack, but any driver trying to follow an F1 car is in for a rough ride. Thousands of liters of water are sprayed into the air and onto the car behind, making it almost impossible to see. At the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix, wet weather caused the most expensive crash in Formula One history. On the first lap, lack of visibility caused a chain reaction and ended up with the cars, wheels, and shrapnel flying everywhere. The race had 14 retirements, and the total bill came to a cool $13 million. That might be the most expensive shower in history. Level playing field. So with all that danger and disruption, why do fans still love the rain? When the rain pours down onto the track, it offers a lot of drivers their best chance at success. In a normal race, there is a gap between the top 2 or 3 teams and the rest. That's because the top speed, downforce, and performance of strong teams is more apparent in dry conditions. When it rains, it reduces many of these factors. The top speed can be less important because all cars are going slower, and so the different levels of downforce are less noticeable too. Former racing car designer and commentator Gary Anderson has said that the wet conditions equalize car performances and increase the driver's contribution to the outcome. During qualifying at the Turkish Grand Prix in 2020, it was the perfect example of this. Mercedes had been dominant all season, but could only manage 6th and 9th place. Young Lance Stroll, on the other hand, took pole position. It was a reminder that he's not just a pay driver, and that he can be dangerous when given an opportunity. He carried the momentum through the race, and was leading for the majority of the race, but fell down the order when he picked up some damage. Still, a pole position in Formula One is something that not many drivers actually achieve, and it was all thanks to the rain. He said after the race that driving on ice in Canada had helped prepare him for rainy conditions. I guess that's one perk of growing up in one of the coldest countries in the world. Who are the best wet weather racers of all time? And which driver won a race despite 200-to-1 odds? Don't go anywhere, because all of this is coming right up. Chaos in Monaco. Dry tracks are best suited for the optimal performance of cars. That's when the tires have the most grip and the conditions are predictable. But when the rain comes into play, it's a different story. That's why wet tracks have caused some of the biggest upsets in F1 history. If we go back to Monaco in 1996, Olivier Panis was the last person anyone expected to win. He had never won a race and qualified more than 2 seconds slower than Michael Schumacher in pole position. It's a lesson for why you should never give up. It was raining heavily during the warm-up, and an extra session was added to help the drivers to adapt. But it didn't help too much, and on the first first lap of the race, it was already carnage. 5 cars retired on just the first lap, including the favorite Michael Schumacher. Halfway through the race, and the rain had taken a few more victims. There were just 11 cars left, but they weren't done just yet. Remarkably, by the end of the race, only 3 cars remained. It was Olivier Panis, who managed to win the race by 4 seconds over David Coulthard, and it was the only win of his career. At the start of the race, his odds were set at more than 200 to 1 to win the race. Let's hope one of his friends bet on him. A miracle in Canada 2011. This next one is an all-time fan favorite. Totally down on his luck and seemingly out of the race, Jenson Button pulled a rabbit out of the hat. It was the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix and conditions were unforgiving. Heavy rain had caused the race to be delayed twice, and it looked like Button's McLaren was way out of contention. Sebastian Vettel was up ahead by the midway point of the race. Button had qualified in 7th, but after a collision with Hamilton and drive-through penalty, he was knocked way down to 15th. He then collided again, this time with Alonso, and it looked like it was all over for the Brit. But the ongoing torrential rain threw Button a bone. He was able to claw his way back up to 2nd place in between safety cars and race stoppages. Vettel was still up in 1st place and probably thought the race was decided a while ago. Button had other ideas. He kept gaining on Vettel until he was close enough to touch the trophy. When Vettel made a mistake turning, Jenson said that he couldn't believe his eyes. He realized that he was going to win this race. And he did. On the final lap, he overtook Vettel for the lead. It's considered Button's greatest victory of his career and one of the best comebacks of all time. He led for only half a lap and had been down in last place at one point, but he still won. In total, he made 6 pit stops, had 2 collisions, a drive-through penalty, 5 safety cars, plus a red flag to top it all off. It was one of the biggest upsets this sport has ever seen, and even he couldn't believe it. Best drivers of all time. The best drivers of all time have been masters in the rain. So who are they? Max Verstappen is a regular in top 10 lists of wet weather drivers. He first made an impression in the rain at the 2016 Brazilian Grand Prix. Just like Jenson Button 5 years earlier, Max found himself at the back of the grid after a pit stop. He was 16th, and there were only 16 laps to go. Then came an absolute masterclass from the 18-year-old. He overtook people on the inside, on the outside, and found grip where nobody else could. He passed car after car until he found himself sitting on the podium where he finished. His team boss was certainly impressed. He called it one of the great drives in history. It prompted comparisons to Brazilian 3-time world champion Ayrton Senna, who was known to be a wet weather artist, and the 1993 European Grand Prix was his masterpiece. He qualified 4th, but more than made up for it in his final lap. It's sometimes referred to as the lap of the gods, because Senna performed 4 overtakes to steal the lead early in the race, and despite changing conditions, Senna finished the race by lapping every driver except Damon Hill, who was in 2nd place, who was more than a minute and a half behind him. It must rain a lot in Brazil because Senna looked right at home in the wet. Are you ever excited to see rain during a Formula 1 race? And who do you think is the best wet weather driver? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.